You meet someone new, a stranger, a date, a colleague. You exchange pleasantries, share laughs, and maybe even feel a little spark. But there's one moment that can change everything. The moment you stop and ask yourself one powerful question. We often get caught up in, do they like me? Or am I making a good impression? But what if we flip the script? What if, instead of worrying about being chosen, we focused on doing the choosing? Here's the high one question to ask yourself every single time you meet someone new. How do I feel about myself when I'm around this person? Simple, but transformative. This question shifts your focus back to your center. It asks you to become more aware of how someone influences your self-esteem, your energy, your comfort, your values. Because while it's tempting to evaluate them, how attractive, interesting, or successful they are, the real litmus test is how you show up in their presence. Do you shrink or do you shine? Do you feel safe or do you feel judged? Do you feel excited to be more of yourself or pressured to be less? If you can practice this self-check consistently, you'll stop wasting time on the wrong people and start building meaningful relationships that actually make you feel alive. When we meet someone new, it's almost automatic. We start scanning ourselves like we're under a spotlight. Am I saying the right thing? Do I look good enough? Did they smile back? This mindset places us in a passive role, hoping, waiting, trying to be impressive. But in doing so, we give away our power before we've even learned who the other person truly is. The first step toward building better relationships isn't about being liked. It's about reclaiming your role as the chooser. You are not auditioning for someone else's life. When you approach new connections from the mindset of, I hope they choose me, you automatically set yourself up to compromise. You may laugh at jokes you don't find funny, agree with things you don't believe, or silence parts of yourself just to maintain harmony. That's not connection, that's survival. Instead, reclaiming your power means walking into a conversation with the belief that your worth is already established. You're not trying to earn value, you're trying to see if someone aligns with the values you already have. This mental shift doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you awake. It reminds you that your time, energy, and attention are not to be handed over cheaply. Think about it. Would you ever walk into a store and beg the salesperson to let you buy something? Of course not. You inspect the product, you evaluate if it fits your needs. You take a moment to decide if it's worth your investment. People deserve the same kind of awareness, not coldness, but clarity. And when you reclaim your power early, you grant yourself the space to do just that. That self-awareness also protects you from falling into emotional quicksand, because if you're not grounded in your own value, someone else's charm or attention can become intoxicating and dangerous. You might find yourself ignoring red flags or tolerating poor treatment simply because it feels good to be seen. But validation that costs you your identity isn't worth it. You'll always feel like you're walking on eggshells around someone you're afraid to disappoint. When you reclaim your power early, you make decisions from strength, not desperation. Most importantly, reclaiming your power invites authenticity. You stop performing. You start expressing. You speak with the intention to be heard, not to impress. And the right people respond to that. They don't want your edited version. They want the real thing. You'll find yourself connecting more deeply, more honestly, and more freely when you no longer fear rejection. Because when you reclaim your power early, you're not waiting to be chosen. You're finally ready to choose. When we meet someone new, especially someone who seems impressive on paper, it's easy to get swept up in their resume. We latch onto external markers, how they look, what they do, how confidently they speak. Maybe they've got the career, the charm, the travel stories, or the lifestyle that makes you lean in and think, wow, they're exactly what I've been looking for. But here's the truth. None of that matters if who they are doesn't feel right when you're standing next to them. Their life may look incredible from the outside, but how they show up in your life is what truly counts. It's easy to confuse admiration with compatibility. Just because you respect someone's achievements doesn't mean they'll make a good partner, friend, or even someone you should invest time in. You might be fascinated by their intellect or drawn in by their charisma, but that doesn't automatically mean you're emotionally safe with them. People can be magnetic and still make you feel small. They can be successful and still treat others with inconsideration. What matters more than their highlight reel is how their presence affects your inner world. Pay attention to how you feel about yourself in their company. Do they make you feel heard or just impressed? Do they invite your vulnerability or dominate every conversation? Are you able to share your thoughts freely, or are you constantly editing yourself to keep their attention? When you meet someone with a strong presence, you may unconsciously dim your own light. That's the moment to pause and ask, am I shrinking to fit into their world, or are they expanding to welcome me into it? A person's value in your life isn't in their accolades, it's in how they respond to you. We often overvalue credentials and undervalue connection. It's natural. We live in a culture that celebrates image, success, and influence. But those things don't necessarily translate to emotional intelligence, kindness, or relational depth. Someone might be extraordinary in their career and yet completely unavailable or emotionally immature in relationships. The resume they present to the world might not reflect the experience they offer to you. This is why focusing only on their surface qualities can lead to emotional disappointment later on. So instead of asking, are they impressive? Ask, how do they treat me when no one's watching? Ask yourself whether you feel respected, safe, and seen. If their presence causes anxiety or makes you second guess your worth, their accomplishments won't make up for that. Real connection doesn't rely on status. It relies on the quality of interaction between two people. And that's something no resume can capture. Chemistry is seductive. It pulls you in with a magnetic force that feels exciting, euphoric. When you feel it with someone new, it's easy to mistake that spark for something deeper: compatibility, connection, even destiny. But chemistry is not commitment. It's not character. And it's certainly not a promise. What we often forget is that surface chemistry is just that, surface. It might create initial high, but without deeper alignment, that energy fades fast or turns chaotic. One of the most dangerous things we can do in relationships is confuse intensity with intimacy. Just because someone makes your heart race doesn't mean they'll make your life better. In fact, the strongest chemistry often comes from familiar patterns, some of which are unhealthy. You might feel instant attraction because someone reminds you of a dynamic you've experienced before, not because they're truly right for you. Chemistry can be exciting and toxic at the same time. It can mask red flags and silence your instincts. When we rely solely on chemistry, we overlook crucial signals. We ignore the subtle discomforts. The moment they interrupt you mid-sentence, the way they dodge accountability, or how you feel oddly off balance around them. You chalk it up to nerves or convince yourself it's just part of the excitement. But real connection doesn't leave you confused. It doesn't keep you guessing. True compatibility offers peace, not a roller coaster. And when you look beyond surface chemistry, you give yourself the space to evaluate whether this person actually adds value to your life. We often say, I just felt a spark, as if that's all that matters. But the spark is only the starting point. What happens after the spark? Do they listen when you speak? Do you feel emotionally safe sharing your truth? Do your values align when the conversation moves past banter and into the real stuff? Family, commitment, communication. Surface chemistry might get you through a first date, but it won't carry you through real life challenges. It's what lies beneath that determines the long-term connection. So next time you meet someone and feel that undeniable spark, don't ignore it, but don't rush to crown it either. Let the chemistry be an invitation, not a conclusion. Be curious, be observant. Use that energy as a doorway to ask deeper questions, both of them and of yourself. Because the real magic doesn't come from fireworks. It comes from finding someone who ignites you and grounds you at the same time. Not all emotional shifts are easy to recognize in the moment, especially when you're still getting to know someone. But one of the most important things you can do early in any new connection is to become aware of how your emotional state changes around that person. Emotional contamination doesn't happen all at once. It seeps in slowly. 1 minute you're confident, clear-headed, and grounded. The next, you're second-guessing yourself, feeling anxious without knowing why, or noticing that you're walking on eggshells. These subtle shifts often reveal more than words ever could. It's important to understand that people carry emotional energy, just like they carry conversation. Some people naturally uplift you, while others unconsciously or consciously drain you. Maybe it's how they subtly criticize under the guise of teasing, or how they talk over you when you try to express yourself. Perhaps they dismiss your ideas or shift the spotlight away when you open up. These aren't always overt attacks, they're micro cuts to your self-worth. The more time you spend with someone like that, the more you start doubting your voice, your value, and your instincts. That's emotional contamination at work. What makes it tricky is that the person causing this may not seem like a bad person. They could be charming, smart, or even well-meaning, but charm doesn't excuse impact. If you consistently leave interactions feeling worse about yourself than when you entered, something's off, and often we explain it away. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. They were just joking. But if you feel emotionally cluttered, insecure, or lesser after being with someone, that feeling is real and it's worth listening to. You'll notice that people who contaminate your emotional space often have a pattern. They thrive when you're unsure of yourself. They might not say it out loud, but your uncertainty gives them more control. The more confused you are about how they feel about you, the more effort you put in to win them over, and the more you tolerate things you shouldn't. This dynamic keeps you stuck. It keeps you investing energy in trying to fix something that was never your job to fix. And that emotional disorientation is the cost you keep paying, whether you realize it or not. So instead of analyzing their words, analyze your feelings during and after your time with them. Do you feel energized or depleted, confident or invisible, secure or unsettled? Emotional contamination doesn't announce itself like a red flag. It builds up like dust on a mirror. The longer you ignore it, the harder it is to see yourself clearly. But the moment you start noticing it, you reclaim the power to clean your emotional space and protect your peace. There's a noticeable difference between people who simply fill space in your life and those who actually expand it. The people you choose to keep close should challenge you in healthy ways, inspire new ways of thinking, and encourage you to grow, not by demanding that you change, but by creating an environment where you feel safe and motivated to be more of yourself. When someone expands you, they help you reach a higher version of who you already are, not shrink to fit into a version that pleases them. And that kind of connection, it's rare, but unmistakable. You'll know someone is expanding you by how much freedom you feel around them. With the right people, you don't feel boxed in. You feel like your full self is welcome. You can speak your mind without rehearsing your lines. You can express your dreams, even the wild ones, without worrying they'll be dismissed. There's no fear of outgrowing the connection because they want you to grow. In fact, they get excited by your expansion. They cheer for your evolution, even if it means stepping out of their shadow. That kind of support creates emotional oxygen. It helps you breathe deeper and live louder. Think about how rare that is. So many people want to possess you, not partner with you. They want to be needed, but not always supportive. They love who you are until who you are begins to grow beyond what they can control. Expansion threatens insecure people. But those who are secure within themselves will never be afraid of your progress. They'll see your glow and want to turn up the light, not dim it. That's why paying attention to how someone responds to your growth is one of the clearest indicators of whether they belong in your life long term. Choosing people who expand you also means choosing people who challenge you to think differently in a way that feels respectful, not condescending. They help you break your own mental loops. They stretch your worldview without making you feel small. They ask questions that lead to clarity, not confusion. Conversations with them feel like doors opening, not walls closing. That's not just intellectual stimulation, it's emotional alignment. It's the sense that you're not just surviving around them, you're thriving. And that is a sign of a relationship that deserves your investment. So often we hold on to people simply because they're familiar. But familiar doesn't always mean expansive. If someone keeps you playing small or makes you feel like your growth is inconvenient, that connection will eventually become a cage. Instead, seek those rare, powerful relationships where you feel both grounded and elevated, where you can root into your truth while reaching toward your future. Because people who expand, you don't just fit into your life, they amplify it. Your intuition is your internal compass. It speaks in whispers, in gut feelings, in small emotional shifts that we often dismiss or override in favor of logic, hope, or attraction. Especially when we meet someone new, we can get so caught up in appearances, words, and surface level compatibility that we overlook what our body is already trying to tell us. Intuition doesn't always shout, it nudges. It shows up in the way your chest tightens when something feels off, or how your energy suddenly drops after a conversation that seemed fine on the surface. Respecting your intuition means learning to listen before it has to scream. From the very first interaction, your intuition is taking notes, far beyond what your conscious mind is analyzing. You might not be able to pinpoint why someone makes you feel uneasy, but that doesn't mean the feeling is wrong. Too often, we gaslight ourselves in the early stages of a connection. We tell ourselves we're being too picky, too sensitive, or too quick to judge, but those little pangs of discomfort, those subtle hesitations are often your deepest intelligence trying to protect you. Intuition works faster than logic because it pulls from your entire emotional history, not just the facts in front of you. Respecting your intuition doesn't mean being paranoid or overanalyzing every interaction. It means staying connected to your internal emotional state and noticing the signals your body sends. Did you feel energized or exhausted after the date? Did you laugh freely or hold back parts of yourself? Did something they said sit oddly in your chest even if it sounded charming on the surface? These small details matter. Your nervous system is incredibly wise. It remembers what it felt like to be dismissed, disrespected, or devalued in the past, and it's constantly scanning to help you avoid repeating those cycles. Many people override their intuition because they're afraid of losing potential. They don't want to walk away too soon, so they stay just a little longer and then a little more. But honoring your intuition isn't about running at the first sign of imperfection. It's about staying awake. It's about being present enough to notice how someone's presence affects your peace. When you respect your intuition, you stop outsourcing your truth to other people's behavior. You don't wait for proof of harm before you allow yourself to disengage from what doesn't feel right. Intuition at its core is self-trust. And when you respect it, you send a powerful message to yourself. I believe in my own perception. I honor my feelings. I don't need to be convinced out of what I already know. This deep relationship with your inner signals becomes your best filter in relationships. It helps you move through the world with confidence, clarity, and calm. Because while someone else might look perfect on paper, your intuition doesn't read resumes, it reads energy. And it always tells the truth. You just have to give it the microphone. In a world where we're constantly pushed to network, date, socialize, and connect, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of people we come across. Whether it's in real life or online, we're often flooded with options. But just because someone is available doesn't mean they're aligned. That's why having a clear internal filter, a guiding question you return to again and again, is essential. How do I feel about myself when I'm around this person? Isn't just a reflection, it's a protective tool. It saves you time, energy, and heartbreak by helping you cut through surface noise and get straight to what actually matters. Most of us spend far too long evaluating the wrong things. We wonder if they're interested, if they're emotionally available, if they're going to call again. But rarely do we ask, what's my experience of myself in their presence? That question changes the dynamic entirely. Instead of being stuck in a state of performance or pursuit, you shift into self-awareness. You begin to ask, do I like the version of me that shows up around this person? Do I feel confident, relaxed, and respected? Or am I constantly adjusting, proving, or doubting myself just to stay in the game? This question also helps you separate chemistry from compatibility and charisma from character. Someone can have all the right words, the perfect smile, the exciting vibe, and still leave you feeling insecure, overlooked, or emotionally imbalanced. But if you make this question your compass, you'll notice those shifts early. You'll catch the subtle ways your self-esteem is either being nourished or slowly eroded. And once you've learned to use that awareness as a filter, you'll stop entertaining connections that require you to abandon your peace for the sake of temporary connection. Having this kind of filter doesn't mean becoming guarded or closed off. It means staying connected to your truth while staying open to possibility. You don't have to judge others harshly to recognize when someone isn't right for you. All you have to do is notice how you feel around them. If your voice gets quieter, if your energy drops, or if your boundaries blur, it's a sign. When your internal experience is your guide, you can walk away sooner with less guilt and more clarity. You stop waiting for someone else's behavior to become intolerable before giving yourself permission to leave. And here's what's powerful. The more you honor this filter, the faster you build a life full of aligned, fulfilling relationships. You'll attract people who support your authenticity, who are drawn to your centeredness, not your performance. Because when you make how you feel about yourself the core of your decision making, you stop being a passive participant in your own life. You become the chooser. And that subtle shift, filtering based on your experience rather than their image, is one of the strongest forms of emotional maturity you can develop. Every interaction you have with someone, especially early on, is teaching them something about how they can relate to you. Whether you realize it or not, your responses, your boundaries, your silences, and your tolerances all become part of a silent instruction manual. When you let someone interrupt you repeatedly without saying anything, you're teaching them that your voice can wait. When you overextend to keep their interest, you're showing them that your effort is unlimited, even if theirs isn't. The way you show up tells others what you're willing to accept. And over time, they adjust accordingly. This doesn't mean you're responsible for other people's poor behavior, but it does mean that your patterns help determine whether that behavior continues. If someone sees that you excuse disrespect or downplay your needs to avoid discomfort, they learn that your boundaries are negotiable. On the flip side, when you express your needs clearly and calmly, when you say no without guilt, and when you walk away from what doesn't feel right, you create a standard. That standard doesn't guarantee you'll always be treated perfectly, but it dramatically increases the chances that those who stay will meet you with more care, respect, and clarity. People are always watching for signals, even if unconsciously. They notice how much of yourself you give away before they've earned it. They notice if you laugh at jokes that hurt you or smile when you're actually uncomfortable. And the moment they realize you're more focused on being liked than being seen, the dynamic shifts. You lose leverage, you lose emotional balance. That's why it's so important to teach people from the beginning that your time and presence aren't given blindly. They're given with discernment. And that discernment teaches them to value what you offer rather than take it for granted. Teaching others how to treat you starts with how you treat yourself. If you constantly apologize for having needs, dismiss your own feelings or minimize your worth in the hopes of preserving a connection, you're not setting a strong precedent. But when you move with self-respect, when you hold your space with quiet confidence, you're modeling what healthy interaction looks like. And those who are capable of rising to meet you will. Others may drift away, and that's a blessing in disguise, because anyone who's repelled by your self-respect was never going to offer you the relationship you deserve. At the heart of this idea is the understanding that relationships are co-created. You're not just reacting to someone else's behavior, you're shaping the dynamic in real time. Every yes or no, every boundary you set, every silence you break contributes to the emotional agreement being formed. And when you remember that you have that kind of influence, not through control, but through self-awareness, you start to move differently. You become less interested in chasing people's approval and more committed to upholding your value. You become someone who leads in connection rather than follows in fear. So the next time you meet someone new, whether it's on a date, in a meeting, or at a casual gathering, pause for just a moment, step out of the loop of do they like me, and step into the more powerful question, how do I feel about myself when I'm with them? That single question becomes your anchor. It keeps you from chasing surface level validation. It shields you from emotional confusion. It guides you toward people who help you stay grounded, expand your thinking, protect your energy, and honor your voice. Because real connection isn't about performing, it's about aligning. And alignment only happens when you're awake enough to notice how someone's presence affects your sense of self. When you feel more like you around someone, that's not just chemistry, that's clarity. So be bold enough to ask the question, be honest enough to hear the answer, and be strong enough to walk toward what expands you and away from anything that doesn't. That's not just how you meet people, that's how you find the right ones.